All right, well, welcome back after that short break. It's 11:10, and we'll get started here with our second panel of the day. Again, I'll reintroduce myself for those of you who joined recently. My name is Ashton Potter Wright. I'm the Director of Local Food and Agricultural Development for the City of Lexington and manage the Bluegrass Farm to Table program. And I'm thrilled today to be moderating our second panel discussion focused on wholesale markets and the local food infrastructure, how we've adapted to some changes during the pandemic, and how we're building a brighter tomorrow kind of through three distinct value chains. We'll talk about meat processing, we'll talk about small grain work, and we'll also talk about an exciting cheese project in the dairy sector. So I am going to introduce our panelists first, and then I'll share my screen and let them take it away. So we have three panelists today. Brent Lackey is the Senior Business Development Specialist for the Kentucky Center for Ag and Rural Development, KCARD. He's worked there for 14 years, and Brent has extensive experience in developing a wide variety of agricultural businesses, conducting feasibility studies, and analyzing business operations and management. He also has extensive experience in assisting new and existing meat processing plants, which we'll talk a little bit more about. I'll go ahead and introduce our other two panelists and then turn it over to Brent. Our second panelist, Scott Franklin, is leading American Farmland Trust's effort to incentivize farmers to grow cover crops that improve profitability, soil health, and environmental quality. He's especially engaged in recruiting farms to grow cereal rye for Kentucky's bourbon, brewing, and baking industries. Before joining AFT, Scott managed commercial grain and vegetable farms across the North and Southeast with an emphasis on building healthier soils and organic management. Prior to the start of his farming career, Scott earned a BA in environmental studies with a concentration in plant and soil science. And last but certainly not least, we're thrilled to have Marissa Rago, the sales and marketing manager for Kenny's Farmhouse Cheese, joining us today. She lives and works on the farm and has worked on the Kentucky Cheese Cares project, which she'll share more about from its inception. So I will, Brent, Brett, if you don't mind if I could have screen sharing capabilities. There we go. Thanks. And now I will turn it over to Brent.
All right, thanks, Ashton. It's a greatly appreciate the opportunity to be on here today, and I've enjoyed listening to the conversations already today. It's been very insightful. I do have extensive experience working with meat processing plants, but I've never been on the floor cutting meat, so I am limited on what I can talk about in some ways. But I do feel like the last year has been a crazy year, probably since COVID happened. I don't know if I've gone. There's been very few days at work where we haven't spent at least an hour or two talking about meat processing. And some days that's been our whole conversation. To give some background, probably before COVID hit, February of this time last year, most meat processing, we had 24 USDA plants for beef and pork, and probably 6 poultry plants that were processing options for poultry, and then a various number of other custom plants around the state. At that time, on average, when I talked to my clients, most of them probably had a 6 to 8 week lead time for booking out. And if you called in February, you could get an April date normally. And that lead time would shrink down normally most years to 2 or 3 weeks in the summer months. And then on average plant, a decent size plant for Kentucky, but still a small plant of around 4,000 to 5,000 square feet, on average was doing probably 20 to 25 beef a week, plus 10 to 14 hogs a week. Then COVID happened, and we all know everything that resulted in the massive increase in demand for meat. For the first time in my life, I can remember seeing and going to local grocery stores such as a Kroger, and meat shelves being basically bare, which lead to some panic and conversations going on. So obviously, the demand for local meat and processing services went through the roof. Within a few weeks' time, I talked to processors who were booking out 12 to 18 months out. By April of last year, 2020 was completely booked. I talked to a processor in early May who said, I'm booked for 2020, and the only reason I'm not booking for 2021 is I haven't got my paper calendar yet for 2021 where I write down my reservation dates, but I've got a list ready to go. Some, now, and some of the limitations some of these meat processors in the state had to really just all of a sudden immediately react to their demand is labor. It's a very labor intensive thing to do. It's not the most attractive job for everybody in the world. And you also have some bottlenecks within the plant, no matter what your labor situation is. You can only hang so many animals up in the cooler, and your processing room can be only so big. The size of your processing room can be in the processing equipment that you have, or the packaging equipment that you have. There's some limitations that some of these guys were facing. Now, initially, these processors did try to reply to the demand and try to meet as much of that increased demand as possible. Many of them did increase wages. Some of them paid overtime to get that up. And really, within a couple of months, you saw people jumping up, 20 to 30% on average of doing more per week than what they were currently doing. The guy that was killing 20 to 25 beef was killing 25 to 30 beef a week, or maybe more than 30 a week by the summer, but that still wasn't meeting the demand that was out there. Now you also had some meat processors who had always had some retail and wholesale meat really pivot more toward that because of the opportunities that presented themselves, which was good for them, but it did put some of the customers who relied on their processing, kind of made them look even more for other opportunities, made them shut them out even more. So that's now one thing that did happen is, due to those limitations and the fact that we were seeing that people had opportunities to sell meat or couldn't get a date for 12 to 18 months out, the Kentucky Agricultural Development Board did step in and reply. Next slide, Ashton. Did try to reply to that demand. And some of those things that they did was, and KCARD, tried to assist the Ag Development Board as much as we could, and I do credit them for stepping up and recognizing this and trying to be as forward thinking as possible. In May 2020, the Ag Development Board created the Meat Processing Investment Program with an initial $1 million allocation. It had 4 levels of funding. Level 1 was just an incentive if people were increasing if they were processing more animals over what they were doing the previous month or so, then they would get some type of payout to incentivize them to do that. The level 2 was if you had a simple fix to your plant, such as a simple piece of equipment under $50,000 or under, that would improve your efficiency, then that would be approved without a business plan. And then level 3 is where plants who needed to make major renovations to their plant to increase their capacity, and they were eligible up to $250,000 to get that and make those improvements to their plan. And then level 4 was a pot of money for new processing plants. The Ag Development Board's always concerned with, and I think KCARD as well, about the demand now is spiked up, but we don't want to put too many new plants in business because then they could cannibalize each other if you're not careful, because finding that supply and demand balance is important. And in reality, in pre-COVID world, when talking to other meat processors, they felt like the supply and demand balance was pretty, a 6 to 8 week lead time means the supply and demand balance was okay in general. Now there were some people who had issues, but there was okay. It was much worse to balance than it is now. Also in November, and then later in fall of 2020, they put another $500,000 in that pot. November 2020, the governor awarded the Ag Development Board $2 million in CARES money that they could go to meat processing. Another thing that the Ag Development Board has responded to, because they are concerned about making sure these processing plants are as profitable as possible, profitable and can service our farmers across the state. They contracted with a meat processing consultant named Bobby Pace, who goes when people are submitting plans to the Ag Development Board for new plants or for making modifications to new plants. Bobby goes and visits their plant and provides some input to them at no cost. That initial gives them a report saying, here's some recommendations that I would make for your plant. And finally, in February of 2021, the Ag Development Board did allocate an additional $2.5 million into the meat processing program. So as you can see, there has been quite a bit of money trying to flow into that. Next slide, please. and then what's happened is 11 processing plants did receive a total of $2 million of CARES money. Of the meat processing plants, 18 plants have received funds so far, 16 existing plants and 2 new plants are about to come on. So a total of $2.38 million has been awarded. Right now, with the way they're measuring things, they think the estimated increase in capacity from their investments in 2020 is about 239 beef equivalents a week, or 12,000 beef a year. And normally 1 beef equals 2 hogs, and that's one way that we look at things. They have remaining funds for 2021 of about 1.6 million, what they're doing there, and they're taking applications on a quarterly basis. So where are we today? Demand for processing services is still very, very high. I talked to one of my clients this morning, and he said he's already booked. He's pretty much booked for 2022. He's already got people asking about 23. The Ag Development Board investments that have been made really are just now starting to come online. A lot of those things were awarded, the first ones were awarded last fall. As everybody knows, construction takes time. So some of those things are still coming online. So we're just now really starting to see that increase in capacity come online, and we'll see what it looks like a few months from now. But also talking to one of my clients this morning who's almost done with his expansion, as he was saying that labor is still a major bottleneck for his expanding his plant. He says there's a real balance that he tries to justify. Because I know I need to pay wages to get people, but if I increase my wages too much, then I have to increase my processing fees, and then it makes it that much. Then that farmer has to increase his price to the consumer, and there has to be a balance in there. If you're not careful, you can price somebody out of the market if you're not careful. So that is a balance that they have to consider. There's also, I think what the demand for meat will be in meat processing a year from now, I think we're very uncertain about. I don't think we'll go back to pre-COVID demand. I'm talking to people, but do I think we had a peak in the last year that we're going to come down from? Probably. I'm hearing some anecdotal evidence from people who market meat, some farmers who market meat, who say they're moving quite more than they were a year ago, but the demand for it's not what it was 6 months ago either. So things are still fleshing out. And then one of the issues that probably is where we're not quite in as good shape now as we were pre-COVID, and then the demand for those services is just as high, if not higher, is on the poultry processing. We've got one plant in Kentucky who's had some labor and equipment issues, and we're not sure if they're going to stay online. We've got another plant who's, due to some pivoting changes in their marketing strategy, and they're no longer doing processing services for poultry customers. One of the other clients and other plants in the state that does poultry is so booked up with beef. He's still taking care of his existing clients, but he cannot take on any new customers for their poultry processing. So I think that the infrastructure for poultry processing in the state is not probably where we need it to be. Though I know KSU is about to make a new investment in their mobile processing plant to expand it or more of a permanent facility there on the campus, I believe. But however, farmers do have to do the processing themselves there, and not everybody wants to process their own birds. That's just my basic spiel on where meat processing over the last year and where we are now. Hope this has been insightful. I'll take any question. It's time for Q&A, Ashton. So.
Thanks, Brent. How are you? We appreciate you very much sharing that with us. I'm curious, is it possible to tease out, it may be too soon to tell, of the increased capacity, what percentage of those of that increased capacity has been sold through local channels versus out of Kentucky? Do we have a sense of that?
Well, a lot of that increased capacity is for doing processing services for local farmers. So I mean, right. I think I don't know an exact percentage, but I would say a vast majority of that capacity would be for processing services, either processing for another farmer, a Kentucky farmer, or for meat that's being purchased from Kentucky farmers. So,
That makes sense.
I mean, there's some examples that there's some capacity that's going to out of state. I do know that, but I think of, I would say a vast majority, a large majority. So.
Good, thanks. We have a question here in the chat. Do we know of technology that can, you mentioned labor was a kind of a constraining factor for several of these processors. Do we know of any technology that can help with some of those labor challenges folks are facing?
There is some, and that's one of the reasons for the level 3 funding at the Ag Development, where is there new equipment that you can package things quicker or cut things quicker. And so that's some of the investments that some of these processors have made. There is some technology that allows you to stuff meat quicker, or package meat quicker. For a small plant, though, technology, in general, even at large plants, they're very labor driven. There's been some talks about robotics and stuff like that at large packing plants, but even then they're very labor driven. So I do know that there's been some look into some technology as far as some, like using a roll stock machine instead of a vacuum stuffer. A, presents a better presentation, and B, it takes like, you can do maybe you can increase the amount of packages, several times over, but it's a significant investment for that plant as well. So.
Thanks for that. Couple of other quick questions here before we transition. So Mary mentioned, it's good capacity is increasing, being supported by this, public investment. Are there any other associated programs that you're aware of underway to help secure or develop the demand for the, continued demand for local meat here in the state?
Can you repeat that, Ashton? I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow the end of that question. So.
Yeah, sorry about that. So, Mary mentioned the investment from the Ag Development Board to increase capacity, which is great. Are there any other investments or programming around the state to help make sure that we are continuing to build the demand? We've built the capacity. How do we continue to build the demand for local meat?
There's the normal Kentucky Proud marketing programs and other programs. There are programs available. I don't know of any funding per se, major funding programs that I'm aware of, but you're probably as aware of those, Ashton, as I am. So, I think there's resources available, such as your office. I know we've got Olivia in our office who is trying to connect producers with the marketing place. Kentucky Proud's always trying to further the demand for local products in the state. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, and Lori mentioned too, Mary, that Cattlemen's, I think you're aware of, they've launched a Kentucky branded beef product in Kroger as well, and there's other farm products, Kentucky farm products in Kroger, pork, lamb, and others kind of in the pipeline. And so just one last quick question. Amber is asking, you alluded to this a little bit at the beginning, but can you explain a little bit why the demand for meat processing increased? Was it just simply increased demand for meat in general, or do you think was it related to other processing plants, larger processing plants outside of Kentucky closing, that kind of thing?
Well, let's see. I think a lot of it was somewhat driven, but there was two things. One, you had some panic buying of people at the grocery stores. There was reasons we were running out of toilet paper a year ago. They were buying. They were concerned about stores closing. They were concerned about the food chain. They were hearing stories, so they panicked. They were storing up. I mean, I can remember seeing people buying carts of meat taken out the store. Last March. So I mean, people, if you go to Kroger in Somerset for the first time in your life and you can't get meat, you're going to start scrambling. And when you do buy meat, you're probably going to buy more than you're used to buying. So I mean, I don't think there's a drastic increase in demand for meat. I think there was just that shock to the supply system forced people to, A, cause them to panic a little bit, and two, it caused them to reassess where they were buying their food. I think the people who were just panic buying are probably going to go back to Kroger. The people who, okay, do I really want to rely on this food chain system that was so easily, not broken, but had a pause in it for a day? And or do I really, or it made them rethink where they get their food from? How it was nice to go to their local, buy meat from Summit Meats in Somerset, or Trackside Butcher Shop in Henry County, or Boone's in Bardstown, or somewhere, a local place. So I do think there was a reassessment of that demand. So
Great. Thanks so much, Brent. Really appreciate your comments on this. And if you have additional questions for Brent as we move along, please drop those in the Q&A and we'll get those answered. Thanks so much again, Brent. Really appreciate you. Next up, we've got Scott Franklin with American Farmland Trust, who is going to share a little bit about this really exciting commercial rye cover crop initiative. Take it away, Scott.
All right, thank you, Ashton. Well, first off, I'd just like to say thank you for UK for putting together this great discussion today. It's been very insightful to listen into kind of the prior panelists, and special thanks to Ashton and Lily for putting this on. My name is Scott Franklin. I am the project manager at American Farmland Trust, and I manage the Kentucky Commercial Rye Cover Crop Initiative. And really what we're doing in this initiative is enrolling Kentucky farm families and farmers to turn popular cover crops like cereal rye into viable cash crops. To provide a little bit of context here, commercial quality rye was once widely grown here in the state of Kentucky, as late as the 1960s. Over the past several decades, though, production has really almost entirely ceased in favor of row crop production of just a few crops. But recently, more farmers have begun growing cereal rye to capture the environmental benefits. What we know of cereal rye, it's really beneficial for any farmer, regardless of management practice. Cereal rye has a vigorous growth rate. It has an extensive root system that helps to reduce erosion, improve soil structure, and really either maintain or increase soil organic matter. And in addition to that, a lot of local Kentucky businesses are starting to incorporate locally sourced grains into their business model. So really for this Rye initiative, we have two goals. Number one, we want to determine how best to grow cereal rye as a high quality grain here in Kentucky. And number two, we're looking to develop a network of farmers and buyers for that grain. And our hope is that we can help protect our soil here in Kentucky, provide economic returns to farmers, and really strengthen the agricultural supply chain here in the state. And how do we do that? We'll go to the next slide, please. So really, American Farmland Trust is just one of many partners in this initiative. And we're working in partnership with a lot of great organizations, and we think that we can leverage our individual strengths to kind of push forward this collective goal of growing cereal rye here in Kentucky. And so I'll first mention the Kentucky Agricultural Development Fund that's managed by the Kentucky Ag Development Board. Now they invest funds in innovative initiatives like ours that increase net farm income and stimulate markets here in the state. In addition, we work with Dendra Fund, which is a Louisville-based nonprofit that prioritizes projects focused on wood, water, and grain. Those are obviously the three major components to producing high-quality bourbon. We also work with the University of Kentucky, the CAFE program, and the Grain and Forage Center for Excellence. The UK has been leading research in small grains, for the last 30, 40 years. And we wouldn't be where we are, without the great help of Dr. Chad Lee, Dr. Dave Van Sanford, Tim Phillips, and others. And we also work with the Kentucky Small Grain Growers Association. Their support leading small grain research is pivotal here. And lastly, I'll just introduce American Farmland Trust as an organization. We're a national nonprofit that has three main goals, and that is protecting farmland, promoting regenerative agricultural practices and keeping farmer on the land. Like I said, we're based out of Washington, D.C., but we have regional field offices throughout the country, in addition to an office right here in Louisville, where I'm based. So that's a little bit about our partnerships. Next slide. And really this initiative is innovative. We're working this year with 27 farmers representing 21 counties throughout the state. And this year we're growing just under 1,500 acres of high quality rye. And you can see the map on the screen that kind of shows geographically where all of our farms are located. Obviously centered just outside of Jefferson County. Central Kentucky is well represented, as well as Southwest Kentucky as well. And what we're doing is minimizing the risk for the farmer. Obviously, there are, it's well documented that growing cereal rye is beneficial on farm. However, we are asking farmers to grow a new crop in a new way. So what we're doing is providing a reimbursement to farmers. So 20 farms can apply per year. They receive a reimbursement up to 25 acres per farm, and that works out to roughly $550 per acre. So we realize the farmer is kind of sticking their neck out here, growing this new grain, so we want to make it as feasible as possible. So we eliminate the risk that way. And kind of for that, we provide technical assistance to farmers. Farmers are really plugged in with their county extension agents. And we're working now to really develop a network of buyers of this grain. So working with Kentucky distillers, brewers, and bakers. And just kind of some overall goals for the initiative. By 2023, we hope to have 3,000 acres of rye grown in the state. And by 2030, to have 10,000 acres of rye grown here in the state. And happy to report that in year one, we're almost at our halfway goal in year one of for our 3-year goal. So that's exciting. And if we can look at the next slide. And these are 2 maps. Again, the top map just shows where our farmers are throughout the state. And the bottom map was actually put together by the UK Food Connection Local Grain Initiative. And this really highlights the economic opportunities, A, for our farmers, and B, for our Kentucky businesses. There are 75 plus distillers here in the state. We have 70 craft breweries. There are millers, bakers who are using local grain. Kentucky is the largest beef producing state east of the Mississippi. The Kentucky poultry industry is also the #1 buyer of Kentucky corn and soybeans. So really what we're working on is A, how do we grow this as a high quality grain? And B, how do we then connect these farmers with producers all around the state that are purchasing local grains? And the exciting part is that there's really an opportunity for farms of all scales to participate. We work with row crop farmers. We work with livestock farmers who are looking to grow more of their inputs on farm. And we're also working with kind of diversified operations, some farmers who grow vegetables, also raise animals, and are kind of looking to diversify their operations. So there's really an opportunity to plug in kind of at all scales. So that's a little bit about our initiative.
Great, thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate that. We got a couple of questions rolling in here.
Sure.
One you just kind of alluded to, is cereal rye a main season crop or off season, or kind of used in a rotation by most of the producers you're working with?
Sure. So the majority of our producers are incorporating this into their row crop rotation. So that would look like year one, planting corn. At the end of corn harvest, generally around September through the end of October, farmers would be planting cereal rye. Obviously, a lot of our farmers here in the state already, instead of planting rye, they plant wheat. And then come year 3, after harvesting the rye around the middle to end of June, kind of depending on your location, farmers in the row crop system would then be planting a late soybean crop. So that's kind of how it fits into the operation, or into the crop rotation for row crop farmers. Other farmers who are, raising vegetables are using this as a crop, planting it in the fall, harvesting it in June, and then potentially planting, a late pumpkin or squash crop. And some of our livestock farmers are also just planting this as a supplemental feed source. Cereal rye, you can't use it as a main component for a lot of animals, but it can be a part of the ration, or a smaller part of the ration. So there's really opportunities, I think, for farms at all scales to grow this crop.
That's great. That's great. And if for farmers, you mentioned your existing network of growers. If we have some growers here who work with growers who are interested in and getting involved, what's the best way to do that? Just to reach out to you directly, or?
Yeah, sure. If you could share my email, Ashton, that'd be fantastic. Like I said, we're starting to enroll farmers for this upcoming season, and I'd love to talk to any and everyone who's interested.
Great. And yes, I will, as soon as I get done screen sharing, I will drop all the panelists' contact information in the chat. We have another kind of technical question that I think Brett is trying to respond to in the chat, but somebody asked about if rye is isn't it allelopathic? What does that mean for succession crop planting? If you could address that.
Sure. So that's a great point. So rye does have the opportunity. So essentially, once you till it back into the ground, it has this allelopathic capability, which essentially can prevent germination of the subsequent crop. Now, it's really more of a question of timing. That doesn't last, that's a shorter window there. So generally, after you till it or incorporate that residue back into the ground, that only lasts, 2 to 4 weeks. So it's really a question of timing more than anything. You can grow a crop after the fact. It's just really nailing that timing, which can be a challenge, pending weather conditions.
That makes sense. Thank you for that. And then one final question here in the chat, and then I have one more if we have time. So David is asking if if the project's looking at all at grazing rye for livestock production.
Sure. So this year we're working with one farmer who will be grazing it. And that's an opportunity I think we see moving forward. We're really looking farmers to kind of trial this at multiple levels. So if there are farmers here in the state that are looking to graze it, we'd be interested in talking with you. Again, I think that's the exciting part about cereal rye. You can obviously harvest it to the full grain stage, but in addition, can obviously graze that, throughout the growing season. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Great.
And then just one final question. So you presented, all the reasons why Kentucky is so well situated, all these market opportunities for this particular crop. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges to this initiative and kind of taking hold and attracting buyers? Sure, that's a great question. I mean, one of the challenges is really in the supply chain. This is a newer crop. We are proving that you can grow high quality rye here in the state. Now, the infrastructure, to support cereal rye is just not fully developed yet. So on the farmer level, you have to consider if you're a row crop farmer, do you have storage capacity? Can you harvest this grain? Does it work with your management system? Can you dry it down? Can you store it separately from your crops? So that's kind of one issue on the farmer side that we're working on. And then second is really the market is pending right now for cereal rye. And it's really, we're working on identifying
Kentucky businesses who are really interested in incorporating this grain, whether it's at the corporate level to help meet corporate social responsibility goals, whether it's a baker who's looking to incorporate local or regional grains. So, again, it's kind of, how do we grow this as a high quality grain and contend with the farmer piece? And then how do we, successfully build up a market? So those are all, those are great questions and something we're working on actively, to make sure our farmers have access to those markets and also have access to the technical, also so they have technical assistance to figure out how to grow this crop successfully.
Great. Thank you so much for that and for your presentation. We appreciate that very much. Scott's and Brent's contact information, Olivia dropped that in the chat. Thank you, Olivia. Scott, I'll let you know if there's any more questions that pop up you can answer directly in the Q&A.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So last but not least, on our panel, we have Marissa Rego with Kenny's Farmhouse Cheese, who's going to talk to us a little bit about a really exciting project that came online last year called the Kentucky Cheese Cares Project. Marissa?
Hi. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Okay. Yeah, so I work here at Kenny's Farmhouse Cheese. I've been here about 2 years, and this program has been somewhat in the works for a couple years, but really as an idea, and the pandemic kind of helped us actually put it into place. So we work on this with Ronnie Patton at Wildcat Cheese and Bob Klingenfuss at Harvest Home Dairy. And all three of us have always had a passion for either donating cheese when we can or helping Kentucky food banks, as well as supporting Kentucky dairy farmers like ourselves. So Ronnie Patton was really the one who kind of got this idea started, and Kroger was our first, thought, because they already have, as a company, a passion for donating to food banks. They've worked with Feeding America for a while. So we had approached them about getting into some sort of program with them to both sell cheese and to donate money or dairy products in general to the food bank. But getting into Kroger for a small business like us is a huge task. So, you've got to do it the right way. If they want to put you into all stores at once, you've got to have the inventory. That's got to be something that's thought of. So when we approached them, we thought, okay, let's start small, see if we can use this as like a stepping stone to get into more of a general Kroger market. So what we came up with is we each picked 2 of our cheeses that we wanted to sell. So they're smaller pieces. Typically we sell half-pound pieces to grocery stores, but for this program, we wanted to have more of an incentive for people to try the cheese without, this is not something that they've had before usually. So we started with 4-ounce pieces. Took a while to figure out, what we wanted this to look like. And we worked with a lot of different people. We've got Feeding Kentucky and Feeding America, Dairy Alliance, and Kentucky Proud, obviously Kroger, K-Card helped out, and Kentucky Department of Agriculture. And we all worked on figuring out what we wanted our goals to be, which was to support local food banks and to let people know that in the pandemic they were supporting their local dairy farmers, because that was a big thing on the news. People were seeing that dairy farms were already having a hard time, and then once the pandemic hit, that made it obviously harder on everybody. So the marketing went into place to create these coolers that we would place in. We started with 10 different Krogers. So the cooler has pictures of us, the farmers, make it a little more relatable, that people can see that they're buying product from an actual farm, not just commodity cheese. So it's got that on the cooler, and then we donate 50 cents of every piece of cheese that's sold to the food bank. So started that out, rolled that out. We had a great press conference. The agricultural commissioner came out and we did that, and it's done really well so far. So we actually just had a call on the beginning of this week, and from when we started in October is when it launched to December, we were already able to donate almost $400 to Feeding Kentucky. So that was great. And it started small. We started with only 10 Krogers kind of in central Kentucky area, but the hope was in doing this that we could, get in front of Kroger and have that audience with them to say, okay, people care about local products, local cheese. They're big on the cheese industry already. They've, started their own cheese program, and they've really remodeled a bunch of them around cheese. But if you look at the cheese cases there now, it's really not any, if not, just a few American-made cheeses. So this gives people an option. Yes, you can buy your fancy imported cheese, but you can also support a local farmer, which has been big this year. And we actually we're getting the opportunity to triple how many stores we're going to be in starting in the spring. So it's been great, but it kind of covers all the bases we were looking for. So that's really what was important to us. Trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, so hopefully this will be something that we can use in other bigger grocery stores. When the pandemic hit, we lost a lot of our restaurant business, which, our business before we started the pandemic was about 80% restaurants, 20% grocery stores, and we really had to flip-flop this. So this coming in the middle of that big decrease in when restaurants couldn't be open or they were just doing carryout, we relied heavily on grocery stores and individual buyers. So this got, people's eyes on our cheese, as well as Ronnie and Bob's cheese, in a time where people were caring about where their food was coming from. So hopefully that will sustain us through, when everything starts to open back up.
Great. Thanks so much, Marissa. I have just a couple of questions, and folks, if you have additional questions, please drop them in the Q&A. This is a really exciting project. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunities for growth, both from the is there an opportunity to add additional producers, cheesemakers to the pipeline, and then also additional retailers? So I know you mentioned you're growing within Kroger, but is there discussion about growing beyond Kroger?
Yeah, so when the program really got started, all of us that were involved sat down and figured out, there's just 3 of us that are in this now, but if this is going to expand down the road, which is the hope, what stipulations do we want that to be? We don't want to just let any cheese company in, because we want them to make sure that they're holding the values that we started with that were important to us. So some of those were, that they're using milk from cows in Kentucky, and that they are a cheesemaker in Kentucky, because that's the big thing for us. All of us are Kentucky proud producers as well. And so it's important that we're helping the economy here and we're supporting the dairy farmers here instead of sending it out to someone else. So we put those in line. Right now, the plan is just with Kroger, but I think that this model, we've talked about it being successful in other chains or, other groups as well. And it could be something that cheesemakers in other states could use as well. But right now, it's still pretty brand new. It really just took off in October of last year, but hopefully down the road, it will be able to be used in other areas as well. And we're only using 2 cheeses per producer right now. So there's hopefully in the future room for us to, expose more types of cheese to the public.
That's great. That's awesome. And then I'm curious too, sorry, I'm taking moderator's prerogative. I'm not seeing any other Q&A in the chat. Can you talk a little bit about, you don't need to get in the weeds about pricing per se, but I'm curious about how that discussion with Kroger, I think having worked with a lot of producers and different either farmers or food businesses trying to break into some of these larger retail markets like Kroger. Did you all present this project? Did the producers and the cheesemakers kind of you all said, this is what we need to get to make this relationship work, or did they offer anything about price? I'm just curious about how those discussions went when it got started.
So when we started, we set a how much we wanted per piece, what we needed to make it to work. You know, we're not making a ton of money on this because the initiative was for it to be more of a, you know, a project to raise money for food banks. But, you know, we've got to cover our costs. So we did tell them, okay, this is what we need. And then they put their amounts on top. So we get a certain amount, the distributor that we use gets a certain amount. And then the food banks, it was set, they get 50 cents per piece. And then Kroger, you know, can mark it up a bit, and they keep all of them the same price, but they get, you know, what's left from that. So everybody's getting a, you know, a tiny piece of each sale.
That makes sense. And you just alluded to this, but we had a question come through about going through a broker with Kroger. Yeah, I'm assuming, I don't know how much you want to elaborate or care to elaborate, but I'm assuming you're using someone to distribute that to the Kroger.
Yeah, we send it to a distributor in Louisville, and they're ones that already have a relationship with distributing to all the Krogers. And that's, you know, we had been working with them too, they distribute to outside of Kroger as well, but it was a good intro, you know, into Kroger and the distributor as far as here's our product, here's how it's kept. But yeah, we do use a distributor.
Great. And I'm just curious if you all had any, you mentioned since the launch in October, over $400 has gone to Feeding Kentucky, which is fantastic. And they're actually, Sarah will be from Feeding Kentucky is going to be presenting next. So this is a nice segue into that panel. I'm curious, do you all had, when you set out at the beginning of the project, did you have a goal for, like, you know, year one, what the total anticipated sales back to the farm, but also the anticipated amount to go to Feeding Kentucky? Is there any ballpark or guesstimates on that, or is it too soon to tell?
I think it's a little too soon still. You know, we just wanted to kick it off and see how it went. We really weren't sure if it was going to take off, be something that somebody was interested in. We, you know, we got a little nervous because things started to slow down after the holidays, which, you know, they just do anyways. But after the call, finding out that we're going to be put into the Kroger, well, more Kroger stores, but also we're getting a designated space within their deli area to be put in there, and that'll be more long-term. So we're still kind of figuring out what it's going to be, but they'll announce yearly to the public as well, you know, what that amount is. So hopefully if this goes, you know, years and years down the road, we'll have a ballpark of how to plan for that.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Marissa. We really appreciate your time today. And a big thank you to Brent and Scott as well for sharing about, you know, the exciting work kind of in these three distinct product lines and market channels that are helping to build a more vibrant local food economy moving into 2021. And so we will break now for about 10-12 minutes before our third and final panel around crisis care and recovery and emergency feeding. Thank you all.